Welcome to Gateway 2012. I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. This is the opening of our conference, and for those of you who have been with us in the past, you know we're doing things a little differently this year. We had been talking, and we're constantly looking for ways to make this conference and events like this more meaningful for you, more productive. And so in discussions with other council presidents throughout the NMSDC network, with conversations that we have with people that we work with day to day, we felt that there was a need to have a discussion. And so we call this the bigger discussion. So I want to welcome you to our general session this morning, the bigger discussion on the future of supplier diversity. In front of you, you have a very distinguished panel of people, and I'm going to introduce them in a minute. But I do want to just reiterate what we printed in our program book, and that is that we, and I mean collectively we, believe in the power of dialogue to change attitudes, actions, and business practices. And so that's what this is today. This is a discussion. This is a discussion from experts in various fields. We have people from the public sector, people from the private sector, people from associations and organizations, all here with a point of view. They're going to tackle some pretty hard-hitting questions, and we hope that the dialogue that is then provoked is going to produce it's going to stimulate you all to have conversations outside of this session so that this sets the tone for the next 2 days, which we have a jam-packed session of things that will be going on. I'll tell you a little bit about that after the session is over. For those of you who've been following and paying close attention to how we have this set up, we are streaming this session live. So we also have people viewing this session from their desks, from their home computers, and they'll be tweeting in questions as well. So right now I'm going to introduce our panel, and I'm going to start with our moderator for this session. Our moderator is Scott Fowles. He is the president of the Northern California Minority Supplier Development Council. Next to Scott, we have Louis Green. He is the president of the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council. Next to Louis, we have Donald Cravens, who's the director and chief counsel of the U.S. Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Next to Mr. Cravens, Marcus Miller, the vice president of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. We have Reginald Layton, who's the director of supplier diversity for Johnson Controls. And last but certainly not least, Richard Hebner, president of the Houston Minority Supplier Development Council. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Now, you'll notice that I didn't spend a lot of time telling you about them. Their bios are in the program book, and I know many of you will be having conversations with them. Many of you already know them. This conversation right now is about to get off, and we want them to have a conversation amongst each other. We want you to feel free to participate. If you have your cell phones, and we know you do, put them on silent or vibrate. But we want you, if you have a Twitter account, go ahead and feel free to tweet your questions as well. We want audience participation, but we won't be taking live questions from the floor. So we are doing this interactively. We want to, and certainly I need to thank both Google and MSF Global, one of our MBEs, for helping us set up all the technology that was required to get this done. So thank you all in advance, and I look forward to a great, bigger discussion.
All right. So again, my name's Scott Fowles. I run the Northern California Minority Supplier Development Council. And first off, I want to apologize. I did not realize how bright the lights were, so the gleaming off my head, if it blinds any of you, it's not personal. But I would be remiss if we didn't thank the LAMSDC and their staff, because this is going to be a great conference. And also the board of directors, their board of directors that isn't empowering them to have this discussion. So hopefully this will be the first of many discussions going forward. So I would like to say just a brief thank you to the staff and board for allowing this to happen. And I'm going to ask one favor from the audience, and if we're truly going to have a bigger discussion, then I'm going to ask you for a minute or two, or for 2 hours, however long we have you in here, if you don't mind, if we kind of suspend the political correctness that we're always surrounded by when we have these discussions. Is that okay with the audience? Yeah. Okay, because my panel said they wanted to, but I had to make sure that you guys were okay with that. So, and we'll start off, and here's how we're going to frame the discussion. One of my favorite comedians is Paul Mooney, and he was a writer for Richard Pryor, and he says some crazy things that aren't necessarily appropriate. But one of the things that he said that resonated with me was he said that you were either running free or you're running scared. And the question was, how are you running? So I think we have been walking cautiously around some of the concepts of supplier diversity, not necessarily running, but hopefully now we're going to start running more free, and hopefully this is the beginning of many discussions. So the other thing I'm going to ask this audience to do is provide feedback to the council, provide feedback to anybody that you can, that you want this discussion to continue, if it's meaningful at all. Now, if it falls on its face, then just forget I was even up here. So now we'll dive right into it, and this will be the last you'll hear from me. We have our first African-American president, a minority in the office. Let's forget the fact that he's African-American for a second. He's a minority in the office. So I'm wondering, since we have that, do we even really need supplier diversity anymore? I'd just like to hear, let's just start off with that. And I frame this, and I have to give credit to Mr. Cravens because he's the one who got me thinking about that. And so, I'd like to hear from everybody on the panel with that one, and then we'll dive into some of the other. So, Mr. Green, you are first.
No. Don't need it anymore.
Fair enough. Thank you all for allowing me to be here today, and thank the leadership for allowing me to be here. I'm the government guy, and although I know a lot of the panelists here today are going to talk about business and they're going to talk about supplier diversity, the reason I wanted to be part of this discussion is because I think as someone who helps the United States Senate craft legislation, many to deal with the 8A program and other preference programs, the women's program, our vet disabled program, I watch what goes on in the supplier diversity field because, again, if we don't need supplier diversity, do we need preference programs in the federal government? I disagree. I think we do need them. But I'm glad we're having this discussion. And I think, since the election of President Obama, I have found that particularly minority folks, particularly African Americans, we fall in one of three categories. And because we fall in one of those categories, it has made the reason and the necessity for these discussions a necessity. We fall into the category that we've got an African-American president, and no, now we don't need supplier diversity, and we don't need preference programs. There's a school of thought that we made some progress with the election of an African-American president, but there's still more to go. And then there's some folks out there who think it doesn't really mean anything, that we're just in the same boat that we were in 20 years ago. I'm kind of in the second school of thought, which I think there are it's obviously progress. My kids are seeing something I never, ever, ever in my life thought I was going to get to see, a family that looks like them in the White House. However, ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you, I'm glad we're having this discussion because it does make it increasingly hard to sometimes justify the need for these programs. And even worse than that, when this presidency is over, I think particularly in the government, you're going to also see a rush to get rid of all these programs. You had a president that looked like you for 8 years. You guys made strides and gains during those 8 years. We've got to take things away from you, when we all know that's not necessarily true. And so I'm glad we're having this discussion. I do think we need supplier diversity, but I can tell you from a government standpoint, I think there's still very much a need. At least the testimony that we hear at the United States Senate Small Business Committee is that programs like the 8A program, programs that help minorities and African Americans, Hispanic Americans, we still need that. If you look at the wealth gap in this country to this day, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, still our median wealth is here, and other Asian Americans and white Americans, it's up here. I think as long as you've got that disparity in wealth and the median incomes, you've got to have programs that help us.
Marcus?
I would say yes, and I would say yes for two specific reasons. One, I don't know that having the first minority president is necessarily connected to the need to have supplier diversity. I do think that a focus on minority supplier development is essential for the very same reasons that Mr. Craven suggested, but I also think that when you think about what's good and proper about diversity, and for the number of years that corporate America focused on being more diverse in their hiring and in their community engagement, just like any good stool, you have to have a third leg, and that third leg happens to be diverse suppliers. It's really no different when you think about all the ways diversity and inclusion are a part of the fabric of our country, irrespective of who the president is. And before there was a minority president in the White House, there were good, strong diversity programs. And I would argue that on that basis alone, supplier diversity should continue to be included.
Scott, can I elaborate on my no so people can understand where I'm coming from?
We're going to hear from Reggie, and
right.
then we're going to come back
right.
to you, because
I
I am dying to know why you said no. So go ahead, Reggie.
So Scott, I think having a African American president is excellent. I mean, it's one of the greatest things that I think the United States has ever done. Notwithstanding that, though, supplier diversity is needed because of different reasons. It's about economically equipping historically underutilized population groups. So even though President Obama is in the White House, that doesn't change the fact that you have disparity in economics with minority groups and with women and with people who are driving market expansions for corporations. And you also have the need because there's the diversity angle, but you have the need because of innovation. And if you don't have inclusiveness in your supply chain, you risk as a corporation missing opportunities to develop new products, to be able to make inroads in new markets, both here in the United States and around the world. So you do yourself a disservice by not having supplier diversity. So I appreciate what we have with President Obama, but this isn't about how it looks. This isn't about the cosmetic and the picture looking right. This is about the dollars and cents that are in minority and women decision makers' pockets and in their communities.
I am so glad I am not following Reggie. Go ahead. Dick?
And I'm sad I am. But actually, I believe that supplier diversity is needed more today than it's ever been needed. And for a lot of the reasons that Reggie just articulated. It's not so much about race as it is about economics. Supplier diversity was established to create viable businesses in minority communities, to fuel the growth of those businesses with corporate expenditures, so that as they grew, they would create jobs, economic self-sufficiency, a broadened tax base for the community, lower tax rate, and increased spending for everyone's goods and services. In essence, creating an economic engine in those disadvantaged communities that would then fuel the growth of that community, the city, state, and nation. That's desperately needed today as we try, as a country, as a world, to rebound, to regrow our economy. The fact is that there is a growing gap between the haves, largely white, and the have-nots, almost exclusively people of color. And that gap has to be corrected. And it has to be done that in the free enterprise system. We need to involve people actively. We need to be proactive, if you will, about involving everybody in the free enterprise system. And it really isn't working as well as we think it is. Yes, race relations may be at a better keel right now, but that can change if the economics don't also change. So I believe that supplier diversity is needed more than any time in the 28 years I've been doing this.
Now we're circling back.
Thank you. So first of all, President Obama, you might as well say that I saw a drunk person on Bourbon Street. Do we need supplier diversity? A black president has nothing to do with supplier diversity programs, first of all. Second of all, I don't believe in programs. Programs are by their nature temporary, finite, and aren't in the fabric of something. Thirdly, I think the focus really should be on minority business as opposed to supplier diversity because it is about economics. And it shouldn't even be a minority business program. It should be a majority business program. People of color are, just steps away from being the majority of the population of this country. Ergo, it's going to drive the engine of this economy. And if we want to, we're already lost the position as being the first-rate economy in the world, that's down to China. If we don't want to go down to third or fourth or fifth, the active involvement of people of color who are going to drive, who are going to be the decision makers in corporations, who are going to be the suppliers to business, who are going to be the businesses themselves, needs to be the focus, a very intentional focus of empowering them to do some things. So when you say supplier diversity program, that to me just weakens up something that's very, very important. We don't look at it as strategic. We look at it as something to do. It gets pushed off in PR departments of corporations. People can put an ad, say, we care about businesses, and it looks good, and it doesn't mean a damn thing. So I have the whole problem with the whole concept of supplier diversity, and especially you had the nerve to link it to President Obama. So my answer, no.
I had the nerve, so I didn't. So the other rule that we're going to have up here is that so there will be no more profanity.
What the hell are you talking about?
And there will be, and as I can see this is getting personal, there will be no talking about each other's mama. All right. So, so one of the things that I find, whether it's a minority business, supplier diversity, however we want to...
But they aren't interchangeable, Scott.
However we want to couch it, I think the pool is getting diluted. So I think that there are many more groups being gathered into that pool, and whether it's corporate America or the government sector, the goals haven't changed that much, but the pool is becoming increasingly diluted. So when we're talking about the future of supplier diversity, when we're looking at 2050, when we're going to be a majority-minority country, then does it flip all the way around? We're talking about the future of it. So, and this time we'll start down there with Dick.
Well, I'm greatly concerned about the trend that we've seen over a good number of years now, particularly at the government level, to broaden the definition of minority or whatever it's called now, historically underutilized or whatever, to include everyone. And really so we've been able to make the statement, yes, we're growing our spend, but are we really achieving the objectives we set out to achieve 40 years ago? I don't think so. We still see African-American businesses, as an example, languishing way behind everyone else. But yet we can point to our success in doing business with the women, with all the other disenfranchised groups. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be a focus on including them. If that's justified, certainly we should. But let's not take our eye off the ball and give in to the tendency of being able to make it easier to report progress when true progress, at least on some fronts, is not being made.
So on the one hand, you have supplier diversity, which is a set of processes by which an organization would seek to do business with historically underutilized population groups. So on the one hand, I'm happy that we're being precise in our terms. You have the public sector with a set of processes that are really political and legislative. They deemed who was historically underutilized. And then you have the corporate sector where they are doing it for a different set of reasons. And we shouldn't assume that the two sets of communities have the same reasons. One might be political, one might be market oriented, the other might be supply chain efficiency oriented. So that being said, when you expand the pool of classifications, as it's called, I agree with Dick, you have to know what you're trying to do. You have to be precise in your terms. Do you deal with an environment where the decisions are made by women? So be precise. Have a supplier diversity program that supports women business enterprises. Do you have a program where you're trying to diversify the base because you see that minority group members are growing not only in demographics but in wealth? They're better educated now as business owners than they ever were. Does that present an advantage to you? Then you go after, or you design your set of processes, your program, so you go after that particular opportunity. So my point is, on the one hand, I'm glad that we're being precise in our terms. On the other hand, I agree with Dick. Whatever you do to go after those particular strategies, there should be some reasoning behind it. And there should be some gain in what you're doing. So it's not about growing the pool and getting the numbers up. It's about what are you trying to do, and are you successful in doing it? And you measure your progress based on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to increase spend, fine. If you're trying to increase the quantity of a particular type of supplier, fine. If you're trying to diversify where they're located, you would have a strategy to move suppliers around. If it's about growing them internationally. So I think in this regard, it's not that you're widening the pool. It's what are you trying to do with these groups that are historically underutilized. That's how we do it.
Marcus, anything there?
You know, I don't think anyone would argue that more diversity isn't good and proper. And I do think that as the pie has gotten sliced in multiple ways, the fact that there was a pie baked in the first place to provide opportunity is something that we're steadfastly committed to. National Minority Supplier Development Council is going to mark its 40th anniversary this year, and we were chartered to focus on ethnic minorities, Asian, Black, Hispanic, and Native American owned and operated businesses. We truly believe that it's important to recognize the significance of diversity, but we're going to stay focused on our charter because we think that to Dick and Reggie's point, it's really about the economic impact that we're interested in, and ensuring that there's opportunities to develop and then deliver that economic impact so that the communities of color can be better at participating in the American economy.
Go ahead, Doug.
In the governmental programs, you've seen the same dilution, right? We've seen the definition of minority change, and as you raised, a lot of that has been political, and I'm glad you raised the political question. I am one of 2 African-American committee chiefs of staff in the United States Senate and one of 4 in the entire Congress. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I can count on one hand the amount of times that I've been visited by African-American folks who said, Donald, we are here today to talk about we don't want to dilute the definition any further of the 8A program. I can't count on one hand the number of times I've been visited by other groups. And I'm an African-American. I would think African-American people think my door was open. It is political, and I think even in the supplier diversity, as you see things being diluted, we have an obligation, those of us who are African-American, those of us who are for or against it, have an obligation to participate in that process, whether it's political or whether it's economic. And so I do mention to folks that I think we've got to step up, whatever side you're on of these issues, you've got to step up your involvement in the political process as well as in the economic process of whether, if you're for dilution, you think we should include more people in the definition of minority, then that's what you should advocate for. If you do not, we need to hear that too. And I think so part of the confusion we've had is that's what politicians have heard. That's what businesses have heard. It's okay. We've not complained. I think we need to change that.
This conversation harkens me back to the famous quote from the former NMSDC President Harriet Michelle, who says, supplier diversity now is defined as everybody except straight white men, right? Because so many things have been added to that definition. And, and so I think that, attention needs to be paid. Again, I'm from the perspective that we need to look at this as a national economic issue in terms of everything that affects our tax base, military security, how well minority businesses do. It's not an issue of doing something for people of color, but that is going to be how go minority businesses, so will the country go. And anything else that dilutes from that, I take exception to it because I want my grandkids not to have to eat cat food. I don't want to eat cat food myself, but it's probably my future, but I don't want it for them. So number one. Number two, corporations in their economic interests and self-interest, and that's what they should do. That's why I own stock. I want them to do well. They're looking, Reggie lays out some ways they look at it, and JCI is exceptional. But as those pools grow, obviously the focus and the quote unquote pie doesn't grow. And so that's the problem. It's not, the definition, but it's resources matched to that as you articulated. But all that definition, I think, again, takes away from where I feel the focus should be.
So one of the common themes that I've heard from everybody on the panel is we go back to the economics of it. So I worked for General Motors in purchasing, and we had sales quotas, we had profit targets, we had goals, cost-saving goals. Why are those words forbidden when we talk about anything having to do with minority business development, minority supplier development, or supplier diversity? We can't talk about quotas, targets, goals, and if every other facet of how a corporation is measured successfully uses those words, why are they so off limits when we talk about this if it's truly an economic initiative?
But you answered your own question. It's not an economic initiative. Those companies that measure it the same way they measure quality, profit and loss, everything, it's more of an economic issue for them. For others who don't, it's not. And it's couched to many in the C-suite as a zero-sum game. If this woman or this minority gets a contract, it's going to take away from this white male's contract, and that shouldn't be the viewpoint. But I think that's part of the problem, because people see if someone gains, I'm going to lose, and the majority of people in the C-suite are still, are that straight white male. You have that dynamic, so people are uncomfortable saying, I want to measure how we engage, our number of diverse suppliers, how much value they're adding. There's some, and Reggie, you're the exception, but I mean, Reggie could probably speak to it better.
I want to shift the context, right? Johnson Controls is very successful in working with diverse suppliers. Mm-hmm. We're going to end up at $1.8 billion this year. But it's not about goals, targets, quotas. It's actually about projects and dollars, okay? First of all, what generates the need to have a supplier? A project. It's not about a pie where we're doling out dollars and, I'm done with my dollar pie. It's about we need to have a specific task done. Who can do it? Are they diverse? Will it help us satisfy our customers if we have a diverse supplier in it? It's a different framework to look at it. And then on top of that, are there incumbents with poor performance who refuse to do business JCI's way, who want to give us a cost increase? Why would we stay with an incumbent because of momentum and inertia when you have a whole vast pool of excellent minority and women-owned companies? So we don't look at it from we have to have a goal for this. Yeah, we got to have diverse suppliers who can do these projects to solve our incumbent problem or to solve our not exceeding customer expectation problem. So for us, we use the language goals, targets, because we're trying to accomplish something else, solve a problem, and minority suppliers and women-owned companies are a portfolio of folks who can help us do that. So it's a different way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah, and Scott, I wouldn't categorically say that corporations don't use those metrics. My experience is the corporations that are really driving progress in minority business development are very metrics focused. They have goals, strong goals. They're articulated throughout the organization. People are held accountable to it, and they can track their return on investment. Where we're failing in some organizations and we're losing ground in supplier diversity is where the supplier diversity professional can't justify their existence on the basis of metrics. The higher I go in a corporation, the more the talk is in numbers. And so we have to be able to relate to the pressing priorities, and those are largely metrics. And so we have to be able to justify our existence by giving those metrics, by documenting our successes as relates to the corporate goals. I think metrics, and there's plenty of companies here today that I can point to say very strong champions, very effective. Supplier diversity is becoming part of their culture because they're being driven by metrics.
I'd like to hear from the government side.
I'm sitting here and I've been listening. Dick, you said something at the onset that I've been trying to stop thinking about I have been waiting a long time to hear a white guy say that the economics, black business economics, is what's going to make the black community successful. And I know you guys are talking about corporate stuff and all that, and I don't want to get you off of that, but let me tell you why that's important. I live in Washington, but I'm a Louisiana boy, and I read the Times-Picayune every day. And Perry, I read the Advocate every day. I'm 40 years old. Since the time I was 19, I've seen African-American boys kill each other every day. In this city of New Orleans, we have as bad of an epidemic as we've ever had. In the city of Baton Rouge, we've got probably the worst epidemic we've ever had. And I am now convinced, as a former politician, as someone who used to run for office and thought I could save the day, I am now convinced the only way we can really raise ourselves out of this is through economics. We've always said that, but I am now convinced the only way we can make our communities better is to have thriving African-American communities, businesses in those communities, hiring people, creating jobs, creating good family models. And so, I'm glad to hear that, Dick, because I think, and so as we have this great discussion about black businesses and what we should be doing and whether we need diversity or not, I just hope we really, as we leave here, and all of you are watching, all of you in the audience understand, and our brothers and sisters who may be white or from another community understand that really is what it's all about. We should be tired of incarcerating people and paying that bill. We should be tired of the amount of money crime costs us. We should be tired of the amount of money terrible education costs us. And all of that will be fixed. Educational system will be fixed with economics in the African-American community. So I have had a hard time getting over that, Dick, and I appreciate you saying that this morning because that's what this is all about.
So to kind of piggyback off of that, for those of you, NMSDC started out of the '68 Chicago riots. And we've had the same definitions of what a minority business, what a minority supplier is. With the changing demographics, is it time to revisit that? Or does it still hold water? Or Marcus, let's start with you. Since you are, I work for NMSDC, but unfortunately I'm the moderator, so I have no opinion.
Well, and in my role at NMSDC, I work for all of you, with the exception of the federal government, because we're real clear that we are a corporate membership organization that services our corporate members and supports our MBEs as constituents. And I think if I'm understanding your question, what we're really talking about is the definition appropriate, accurate, sufficient? And as we mark our 40th anniversary, what we see is, continuing to focus on our original charter to develop and to maintain opportunities for Asian, Black, Hispanic, and Native American owned and operated businesses, to certify them as bona fide, to develop them and help them get to scale, connect them to corporate opportunities by virtue of our membership organization, and then, of course, to be an advocate for minority business globally, because we are in a global society. We are focused on excellence in global supply chains. It is entirely appropriate for us to continue focusing there because, to everybody's point, there continues to be a great need in looking at how economic impact is going to benefit our entire country as a result of these businesses developing as suppliers and contributing to the economies. All of the statistics that come from the Department of Commerce, from the MBDA, all suggest that minority businesses tend to hire other minorities. So, as someone told me when I first came into my role, if you want to turn tax cheats into taxpayers, or how do they say it? If you want to turn tax burdens into taxpayers, you've got to give contract opportunities to minority businesses. So I would say yes.
So Scott, I want to look at your question a little differently. The National Minority Supplier Development Council does have the important role with those demographics. But I want to focus in on the definition and what they do for corporate America. They certify that a company is owned, operated, and controlled by a minority management team. They do the due diligence on the desk audit of the documentation and the site visit to make sure that these companies are who they say they are. That might seem like a little thing, but we had a perfect lesson in what happens when there's nobody watching the documentation and making sure that people are who they say they are. We saw it in the housing market. Oh, you look like you can afford this house. Oh, you look like this would be a good payment for you. And whole industries went down because there was nobody doing what NMSDC does, checking the documentation, certifying that these folks can do what they say they can do and that they are who they say they are. So does NMSDC need to expand who they're doing it with? Perhaps, but long as they stay to their core of doing the due diligence and documenting for their corporate members who owns, operates, and controls these entities that look like they're historically underutilized. I think that's the key point.
So one of the things that I'm always hearing, and this is just in my role, and I'd be interested, especially from Don and Dick and Lewis, to hear that some of my MBEs don't want to be designated as MBEs because it stigmatizes them. They feel it stigmatizes them, possibly limits their opportunities. They don't want to be designated as an MBE or a DBE because it stigmatizes them or says they're small or incapable, or the term MBE, DBE is associated with inferior in some cases. Lewis, what do you think about that?
You're right. It is associated with that. I mean, even the language, you talk about give an MBE a contract. MBEs are just as good or usually better as anybody else, work their butt off. We talk about giving an MBE a contract like it's some favor. And you know, so the language, what's kind of implicit in the language that we use is there. That perception is there. I would say in full disclosure, when I owned my business, it wasn't certified. I had a white guy who I named as president who would go to all the sales meetings, who would do everything, and I had lots of business for a long time. Chrysler eventually found out I was minority owned and said, "You need to get certified." I've been doing business with you for 4 years. you never knew it. I haven't worked with the Supplier Diversity Department. Really, you know, if you pay for it, I'll think about doing it, but why should I? Because some people are scared to get in the box. Flip side is, though, when there's some great companies, especially some great Fortune 1000 companies that are really committed to help because it is part of their mission, helping to grow. So I think, in being candid, I think you need to look at the sector that you're in. In some sectors, it's probably fine. In other sectors, you honestly need to think about, you know, maybe it's not, or have you didn't hear this from me, but have a front person out there to do that. It's unfortunate that's where we are, but the business realities look at that right now.
All right, you didn't hear from Lewis, but have a front person out there. Okay. All right. I'm just taking notes. I think. Don't worry that this is on YouTube.
No, I'm not worried about it at all.
Go ahead, Don.
I think it's important that those folks who don't want that designation don't get the designation. Those folks who do want the designation, it's important for groups like this to continue the education. I don't look at it as give a DBE business. I look at award a qualified DBE through a competitive process, a contract. We get certified, and you make a great point. We get certified. It doesn't say once you get certified, you're guaranteed business. Right. You get certified in the 8A program of the Small Business Administration. Doesn't mean you're going to get a contract. It's not a contracting program according to the SBA. It's an economic development program. And so DBEs and all the other acronyms, you still have an obligation to be a good businessman or a good businesswoman.
But Don, the problem is this. When an MBE, if there's a mishap, you'll hear, damn it, we used the MBE and they screwed. I'll never use the MBE again. I've never heard something, I'll never use a white company again. This white company was later on, we'll never use a white company again. But you will hear repeatedly, this minority business messed up on this, we'll never use the MBE again. And so that the labeling, that thing is that some businesses have to shoulder the burden of everyone.
Brother,
right, and that's my only point.
But you and I have been shouldering burdens for a long time.
Yeah.
And we continue shouldering burdens every time I see somebody on TV who looks like me, who does something stupid that I don't have to walk out of the house and hope that they think I'm that guy too. That's just part of our obligation and our burden.
You ain't got my wallet, do you, bro?
And so, no, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But I think that's when we, as good DBEs, the good DBEs, that's when you do have an extra obligation. You do have an extra obligation to do a great job so that even sometimes when brothers and sisters don't do a great job, you've also pulled them up too. That's just part of life. I don't think you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think you let a company who's done business with a DBE says, man, we had a bad opportunity. Let's just get rid of our DBE program. We can't do that because there's some the vast majority of DBEs are great. And they go out there every day and they work hard. They get a contract because they have a great business. And
But even the language, disadvantaged.
But they are
business.
But
it's not disadvantaged.
At some point, you hope they're not disadvantaged.
No, they're not disadvantaged.
But at some point,
they're economically screwed over. But they're not disadvantaged. They're more capable than half the people out here. So my problem again is with the language.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
So, Dick, you've been doing this for 25 years. What's your perspective?
Yeah, so the word on the street in Houston is that you'll know, chances are that a company is certified by the Houston Minority Supplier Development Council because the last words out of their mouth, not their first, is that they're a minority business enterprise. You know, if we're doing our job, we're empowering them with the information and insight to be able to go in and talk at a competent level. But I think it also begs roles, okay, that what does certification mean? Does it just mean that you're just a minority owned, managed, and controlled? Or does it mean that you're really in a position to be able to do business with major companies, that you've been through some training, some vetting, if you will? Do we have the data? So our role as an organization, I think, changes from just going out and identifying them to really preparing them to be successful in this market. And that's challenging. It also says that we could be collaborative. We can work with a whole lot of different organizations that share our mission, maybe at different levels with different focus. And I think the key to that is, let's not try to do all things to all people. Let's get focused on the problem and let's divvy up responsibilities and let's get the problem resolved. Our board has recently said the council has become very effective in positioning minority firms so they can effectively compete for, win, and perform on contracts with major corporations. They said, well, we're not satisfied. We want the council to position minority firms in such a manner that business is attracted to them because they're that good and because you said so. Okay, so changing role. And I think, so we listen to our customers and say, how do we take it to the next level? We have a whole lot of organizations that are competing with us. They see what success we've had. They say, well, I want to do it too. I want to cash in on this. And my feeling is, we don't need to compete. You do it. Now that you know how to do that, let us raise our level of support and leadership to another level that we're now prepared to do that they're not quite prepared to do yet. So good. There's plenty of work for all of us to do in supplier diversity. Let's divvy up the responsibilities, get the job done.
Reggie, it looks like you're about to explode if I don't let you comment.
I think about the question that you're asking. I hear it a lot from diverse suppliers. Why do you have to have me in this classification? And my response is, diverse supplier, you can't have it both ways. On the one hand, you want me to be able to answer the question, well, how much do you do with diverse businesses? Where are they located? How have you helped communities of color and women grow? You want me to be able to answer those questions, but you don't want me to be able to see who those people are. You want me to be not credible, right? Do you understand, as we said previously on the panel, that the higher you go up in an organization, the more metric-driven it is? So you want me to not have a metric on our performance with diverse suppliers and the impact and outcomes we've had. Is that what you want? Well, it just costs me money. I don't want to do it. Okay. Do you want me to promote your business throughout Johnson Controls? Okay. Do you want me to promote somebody who looks like they're diverse and then we all discover, like in Cincinnati Public Schools example, that the folks that they thought were diverse suppliers weren't? So you can't have it both ways. If you are afraid to be stigmatized by this designation, then don't sign up for it. You can play your cards the way you see best. But if you want us to help you grow your business, it comes with the territory. That's what I want to say.
And in the interest of maintaining our focus on precise language, what I meant by give opportunity is really to give chances to those firms that have demonstrated their capabilities and capacity, not give them contracts for the sake of just giving them, because it's not something that they're owed. It's something they work at, and the certification process validates that they've worked at it such that they can now participate in the supply chain.
Maybe
Go
we're
ahead,
talking
Doc.
about two different types of minority businesses too. You make a good point. If a brother or sister has a successful business, why should they be lumped in as a socially disadvantaged business for a certain program? I don't think we should get rid of the disadvantaged business because they are people of color who are still very much disadvantaged and who deserve a play in that role. But maybe there needs to be the creation of a new program. Why couldn't, and I've been trying to float this idea, particularly among African American, Hispanic, and some of our minority communities. We've got a lot of successful small businesses in this room, minority-owned small businesses in this room. Why shouldn't we consider the creation of a new program, and I'm speaking from the government standpoint, that if you mentor or do business with an SDB, you may no longer be socially disadvantaged. You may have graduated out of the 8A program because you're successful now. You're not socially disadvantaged anymore. Why couldn't we create a program where there'd be some incentive for you now to mentor the socially and disadvantaged? You're no longer an SDB. You may be just a minority business owner. But maybe we are arguing, not that we're arguing, but maybe you're right. But maybe we shouldn't lump people into just one fit classification because it worked when we created the program in the 1960s or 1970s. I don't think we get rid of the original intent because we still have the same problems. But maybe we need to expand opportunity for small businesses.
So we're being precise in our terms. This is one of the major differences between the public sector and the private sector. Right. The public sector, of course, like it has political undertones. In the private sector, you can have a huge minority business, okay? And to Lewis's point, there still might be stigma associated with them being a minority business enterprise. I mean, worldwide technology, they're $4 billion.
Yeah, we have billion-dollar companies that have the stigma.
Yeah, Bridgewater Interiors, Software House International. These are all billion-dollar companies with thousands and thousands of employees, and they're not small, they're not disadvantaged, okay, but they are a minority. Yeah. Okay, so we need to be precise in our terms. We need to design our programs accordingly. And yes, we can have those programs, particularly in the private sector, where they're designed to address a specific issue, diversify the supply chain, go after market opportunities, or whatever.
Well, I think it's clear that we all realize how important supplier diversity and minority business programs are, both in the corporate arena and the government arena. So, and maybe it's just me, but why is it that I'm seeing more corporations cut back on their supplier diversity programs in terms of funding? Why I'm getting more resumes from former supplier diversity program managers, and then I can't let the government slide because I got a note, 6-7 months ago that they were closing all the local MBDA offices. So if we care so much in all these arenas, why do you think we're making everything so, or why are we shutting it down if we care and it's important? Ooh, they're quiet.
So I'm the corporation on the panel. So let me try to help. Okay, Johnson Controls. 8 years ago, I had 9 people on my team. Okay, now we're down to 4. So on the surface, it looks like we're cutting the program. Johnson Controls is part of the building construction industry and the automotive industry, 2 industries that were severely impacted by the financial crash in 2008. And of course, my budget is frozen. So what's the good side in all this? We applied our resources more innovatively. We leveraged technology. So our spend has doubled in the last 8 years. Because now we don't have a person going around training our 2,500 buyers, and yes, it's 2,500 in 300 cities. We use technology to do that. We leverage the tools of electronic profiles rather than me taking a diverse supplier in the room with the buyer. These people are in teams in different cities. We electronically broadcast the profiles to the same people. So innovation, process improvement has also a play in this, where you see corporations reducing their staffs. And you see better qualified supplier diversity people. They're at a higher level. They're talking about mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, buying divested plants. $600 million of our spend came from where several MBEs bought Johnson Controls plants. So there's a reason why there are lower staffs, but there are also good news in that we're leveraging the available resources that we have.
Yeah, I think couple things. I think one, and I include myself in this, as folks who support supplier diversity professionals, we've done a miserable job giving them the tools they need to make a business case about the importance of their work. There's some people who get it on their own, There's some people who, are fortunate to have an ecosystem of leadership where it happens, but we've done a terrible job, and maybe Dick and Marcus and you haven't. I've done a terrible job of giving the tools to my corporate supplier diversity people so they can go in on their performance to show how they're adding value to the company, how they can maintain, some kind of close to C-suite relationship, which is difficult to do. We always say in best practice, go march up to the CEO. Not too many people in a Fortune 100 company go knock on the door of the CEO, just keeping it real. But we haven't done the tools to do that, to show the value beyond, the value's always been about meeting a target. So, problem is you make your 8% target. Well, hell, we don't need you anymore. You won your corporation a year ago. We don't need you anymore. It needs to be more about a different type of value and measure. And I don't think we've done a good job getting the tools of people to help and make that happen. And so you see the programs getting cut back because they can't demonstrate the value. The one thing that made me feel good when I was at, General Electric, Jeff Immelt said, because, I was fortunate enough to make my case to him repeatedly. And he said, if I had to fire 90% of the people in this company, you'd be one of the 10% of the people I keep because I get what you do and I understand the value to this company. And I don't think we haven't given the tools for people to do that on a consistent basis. And in corporate, you can't measure it, man, you're gone.
Exactly.
And I think relevance and priority. I've been told by some corporate CEOs that I said, how come you're assigning the same value to supplier diversity that you assign to other programs? And they said, well, you're not relevant. Okay, tell me more about that. Okay, well, you don't relate to the 4 or 5 things that I'm interested in. And so I'll use local content as an example. For companies that trade internationally, do business internationally, they are faced with requirements to use local-based firms. And there's a strong emphasis to, how are we going to do that? Most of those firms aren't capable of working at the level that our suppliers that we've grown over the years are capable of working at. So how do we meet those requirements? And I simply asked our chief procurement officers, how does supplier diversity get the same level of commitment that you're now playing on local content? And they said the difference is local content's an imperative. Either you do it or you don't do business. Supplier diversity is still a possibility, a preference, possibly something that we're interested in if we get around to it. But we don't have to do it. Some where we need to assign higher priority. The companies that have assigned high priority to minority business development are the ones that are performing at that level. And so getting to the CEO, cost cutting that Reggie's talked about, that's common. Doing more with less, that's common. Let's not disguise that for the fact that we still have to show through metrics, I believe, our return on investment in supplier diversity, prove that value and raise the priority within the company to a level comparable to efforts like local content.
You mentioned the Minority Business Development Agency, which is run through the Department of Commerce. How many in the audience, just by a show of hands, are familiar with the Minority Business Development Agency? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you heard that there may be cuts to the Minority Business Development Agency? All right, so the people who are watching online, I don't think they can see this, but we've got a couple of hands up. Of those of you with your hands up, how many of you, when you heard that, emailed your congressman or congresswoman, your United States Senator, or the president? Okay, 2 or 3, 4. That's what it's all about in the public sector. That's what it's about in the public sector. When we hear these things, ladies and gentlemen, I think, for a while we've kind of got accustomed to we've gotten accustomed to bad things happening and there's not much we can do to change it, or maybe with this administration, bad things can't happen. And that's not the political reality or the public reality sometimes of government. Decisions aren't always made. Decisions aren't always made. I'm trying to keep my job up here. Decisions aren't always made that way. You got to be an advocate. You've got to be an advocate. And so when you hear about those decisions, the Department of Commerce is considering something, you've got to be an advocate. You've got to, and it's so easy these days to be an advocate.
Email.
You can shoot an email very quickly. Other groups do it.
Right.
I'm here to tell you, other groups do that. They are advocates for what they believe in. So when we talk about the definitions have expanded, there's a reason for that. Because some group advocated, we want to be in this definition. We want to participate in this program. We want the benefits. Advocate.
So not that everybody on this panel would have an idea, but why does it seem like there is such apathy amongst the minority supplier community? If other groups are willing to come up, knock on the door, whether it's corporations or the government, why do you think there's like unless I'm clueless, I've never heard of like a minority supplier think tank, minority business think tank. NMSDC is the closest thing we got. But so why do you think there's a sense of apathy, or I find a sense of apathy or something? Something's amiss amongst our minority suppliers.
Well, I'll say that I don't know that it's apathy. I think, in what's been said on the panel so far, it is really about business owners being in business, keeping their head down, focusing on, building their competencies and delivering their products, on time, on budget. Not that they're not interested in, being more visible, more vocal as advocates, but they're really focused on building and strengthening their business. I think that the difference between the public sector and the private sector is primarily the fact that the government is working on a public interest platform, and the private sector is working in its own enlightened self-interest. And I don't mean that as a pejorative. It's just the way business gets done, and where there are businesses that are committed, they have tended to be committed on two levels. One, because it's in their enlightened self-interest from a community standpoint, their employees, their community face, if you will, and then ultimately, to Reggie's point, their need for more innovation in an increasingly competitive environment. But then I also would say that they, in doing business with the government based on the government's public interest platform, want to comply with the government's interest in ensuring that there's opportunity for the public. So when you look at it in that way, I don't know it's apathy as much as it's people, again, just being really focused. And now that there is more of an issue at hand, there may be more of an interest and a willingness to be more publicly involved. But I don't know that I'd call it apathy.
And as I meet with folks, African-American business owners, Hispanic business owners across the U.S., I don't sense an apathy. I sense that these are men and women who are working very hard, keeping their head down, trying to get it done. I think the difference between our minority business groups and some of the other groups is they've got one message, a paid advocacy group.
There it is.
Who goes to the Hill on their behalf, and it's a clear message. What I hear is, I hear a lot of little messages here. I'm in New Orleans, I hear from great businessmen and women who give me a great message, and I try to take it back, and then I'm in Dallas, and I hear, you guys have a fantastic chapter in the organization in Dallas, Texas. I hear great messages from them. On the Hill, very seldom is there one message, and it's a message that, oh, that's so-and-so, he or she advocates for minority business interest. He or she advocates for the 8A program. He or she advocates, and every time I see that person, I know they're there working on those interests. We don't have that, by and large. We don't have that in our community. Other groups do. They do. You know who the lobbyist is for this organization or that organization. You know what their job is. Their job is to make sure they're watching, to make sure that the programs aren't cut. They're watching to make sure those centers aren't cut. And they're also there to advocate to do some new things, to strengthen programs. We don't have that one voice on Capitol Hill. And that's not to offend anybody. And there's some, but it's not the same. It's not the same. The message is not always being delivered concisely.
And I would say it's not just, it's maybe not really apathy. It's more skepticism. Okay, my vote doesn't count. Nobody really is going to do anything anyway. Supplier diversity doesn't work. There's plenty of examples that would support that. And so 80% of the businesses, small businesses, don't make it 5 years. There's a lot of people out there that aren't making it. We don't do a real good job of positioning those that do. There's also a different attitude, I would say, in minority communities where where if you've been born and raised in America and you hear about this as a land of opportunity, your life experience has not necessarily been that, supportive of that. But if you come in from another country today and you come to America thinking that this is the land of opportunity, chances are you're going to succeed a lot faster than perhaps even the white people born in this country, okay, who are conditioned with that skepticism that said, I tried it, I've seen other people try it, it doesn't work. But a lot of the immigrants are coming into this country and doing exceptionally well because they come here with little resources, but a great attitude. And so I think part of that is really providing broader depth of support to the firms, but also get into, as Marcus said, their headset, to help adjust the headset and help them understand that, wait a minute, this is the land of opportunity. Let's pursue it as if it was.
Yeah, Dick, I agree with you, but Don makes a point. I mean, if you take kind of the 15,000 largest businesses just in the NMSDC network, MBEs, minority businesses, if each of them said, I'm going to put $100 towards a lobbying firm to advocate for, so with $1.5 million, you could have a lobbyist in D.C., a good lobby firm to keep the interests
I do that.
in front of everyone.
I do that.
Right? No, I'm just saying, but that will make all the difference. There is no voice there in D.C. There's no consistent voice of message on the Hill, and it doesn't cost that much to get a good, credible lobbying firm to keep that message who's committed to doing that in front of everybody. And, I don't want to sound like one of the late night, for only 30 cents a day you can sponsor a child, but for only a couple pennies a day, you could have your business in front, top of mind of people in the city. But the MBEs are going to have to own that and make that happen.
And who's doing it on a state level? We're talking about Washington, D.C. There are a lot of state policies that affect businesses as well. Who does it on a local level? Who lobbies at the City Council of New Orleans for African-American business? And there may be someone. I'm just saying you've got to look at it at all those levels. Other people do. Other groups do. That's in the public sector. And I'm not the business guy up here, but I'm the government guy up here. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how it works. I mean, your elected representatives who you've put in office, they've got to hear from you. And they've got to know what's important to you. They've got to know what issues matter to you. And that's how our democracy works. And we have an obligation as African-American, Hispanic, minority business, white business owners, you do have an obligation to make sure that your voice is heard to your elected representatives. Some of you do. But is that voice concise? Is that voice loud and clear? It's not enough just to have black elected officials on your city council or in Congress or in your state legislature. It's not enough.
So Reggie, were you about? Okay, I feel like we've picked on the government a little bit here, but I love and respect Don, so I'm going to do my best to make sure he keeps his job. So I'm going to lay off of you for just a second.
Thank you.
But
Mama's got to eat.
One of the other trends that I find, and again, it may just be me. One of the trends that I find disarming within the corporate supplier diversity programs is that percentages of spend will get reported, and then when we do a little bit better digging, we find out that certain services or products may be left out of the overall, so we're not taking the percentage from the overall spend. And Reggie, I'm going to leave you for last on this one.
Okay.
But Marcus, Dick, Lewis, do you find that? What do you think about it? Is it happening, or is it just some corporations, not in Northern California? I need to keep my job, Don.
I'll go, fine. I mean, yeah, of course corporations do it. Some do, not all. I mean, it is, some people will say they have business reasons. Some people are trying to meet a number for whatever reasons, for contracts, for public face, whatever. Others are more serious about their numbers and the integrity of their numbers. And most companies don't treat their minority business supplier diversity numbers with the same kind of integrity as they will with other numbers. It can be a little soft, a little loose. Reggie, looking like you might disagree. I think most companies don't keep good numbers. I doubt if most CEOs would stand, if they had to stand behind their numbers, they wouldn't do it, because I think most of them are soft numbers. But I think the bigger issue, Scott, is really it's about value, because, it's easy for a large corporation, potentially you can kind of have a shell MBE company that's doing everything in your system. You have a big number, but you're not adding any value. You're not creating jobs. It's not getting down to communities. Really, that should be the impact of the spend as opposed to the spend itself. The spend only means so much. If I told you, and I come from a place where we've got lots of companies who do over billions of dollars a year, but it's really about the impact of that spend. I think we've always been focused on the number and the percentage, and we should measure the impact, the lives transformed, the jobs created in communities. Those numbers, there's some more meaningful numbers.
And who measures the numbers?
They measure their own numbers.
Companies do.
But okay, who compiles the numbers? No, and who compiles the numbers? You made a great point earlier. You talked about a think tank. Where is that African-American think tank in this country? I ask this question all the time. There are a couple of organizations that have economists. I know the National Urban League has a fantastic economist, and I was with her at the last convention, Dr. Wilson. But I ask this question all the time. Where in America is there a group of men and women who their sole purpose is to measure those things, whether it be in the private sector? We want to see what impact the minority programs are having. We want to measure the public sector. And now we will have a message. So when we do hire our lobbyists to my right, we will have a message because we've got good numbers. Yeah. I ask this question, what are the numbers? Who is our think tank? Where is our think? Other groups have think tanks. Plenty of think tanks on the other side, right? Where are our numbers? What are our numbers?
And that would open the platform for the MBEs.
Then we could always have our discussion.
We're doing, this is a tax revenue we're putting in your community. This is what we're creating in your district. That when you do that, it empowers you. It empowers the MBEs to do lots of stuff. It helps you make a stronger case. It helps Reggie in his job, right?
So I can say from a local level, okay, 20 years into this field, I never used the numbers that the corporations reported to me, okay? Because they weren't comparable. I couldn't compare them against each other. They weren't credible, frankly. They were reporting people that they thought were minority businesses. We, about 6 years ago, went to an effort where we now send them the list of firms and say, right in the column next to the list, the amount that you spent with that firm. If they're not on the list, they don't count. Right. Now, I could do that at the local level, but then that gives me a wealth of information because I can marry that up to the database and I can find out, what fields are we excelling in? What are we overcrowded in? Where are the opportunity areas for minority business that we need to begin moving people to? And I think to the credit to a lot of our corporations in Houston, particularly in the oil and gas industry, where they've said, okay, most of our spend is in downstream. But most of our spend with minority firms is in downstream, but there's a huge opportunity in upstream. But we don't have many minority firms. And so a concerted effort to try to move some firms who have achieved excellence in downstream operations to the upstream, where there's more money and more opportunity. And so I think it's, again, having that metrics locally that justifies our existence, but more importantly, empowers us to, one, recognize companies that are really doing it, okay, and two, be credible as the authority of minority business development, and three, flesh out the opportunities. What's the reality and what's the opportunity?
Okay.
Go ahead.
And in the context of this panel, subtitled The Future of Supplier Diversity, it's really having more diversity in thought and application of the processes that really make up the end game, which is to take, as Dick mentions, those firms that have been successful downstream and develop them so they can do business upstream. I mean, that's essentially the essence of our 40 years of focusing on supplier development. There are organizations that do business development. Some of those organizations operate with a think tank mindset. There's chambers that are focused on advocating for those businesses. But it's probably safe to say that every business is not a supplier. And so to focus on how you now develop those suppliers is really how you start to drive the metrics, because that's what the companies are paying attention to. It's, how are these collections of businesses going to help us with our corporate goals and objectives?
Uh-oh. Corporate man, sorry.
So Scott, you asked a question. about what we call in the supplier diversity world excludables. What do you take out of the calculation so that your numbers look better? And in Johnson Controls case, I mean, our program, our initiative, our efforts, our processes are only 16 years old. So in my book, we're novices at this. We're young in doing this. So there are a lot of bad habits that we never picked up. We didn't know that people excluded things, right? I didn't find that out until I was in the job for 8 years. It's like, you exclude capital equipment? Really? Why would you do that? So we don't exclude anything but salaries, taxes, and contributions. Everything else is fair game. Now, what I hear from my colleagues is, well, there are industries where there are no minorities. And I say, how do you know that? How do you know that? And then they say, well, there are no aluminum smelters. And I said, well, you know what? We had that situation in our battery group. There were no lead smelters, we thought, until we checked. Every day, minority companies and minority management teams are buying existing companies or forming companies. You can't say, let's exclude something in the calculation because you believe that they aren't there. It's our job as supplier diversity professionals to check. The other thing that's the answer to this is you don't exclude things. If you're buying it from a company, it's part of the calculation. And then it's all about integrity. We don't do this calculation on percentages. I mean, our projects are denominated in dollars. How much is this project worth? $1 million, not 10%. What is that? So there's a whole orientation on the calculation, okay? Projects are denominated in dollars. Work is denominated in dollars. The metrics are denominated in dollars. The goals are in dollars. Everything's in dollars. So, I mean, since we're going to have numbers-based metrics, let's deal with that. I was looking at the numbers. You heard me say that we're going to end fiscal year 2012 at $1.8 billion. Okay, so that's 565 minority and women-owned companies. 80% of those are minority-owned companies that are certified. We got another, 300 that are alleged that we don't count. All right. I looked at the number of employees they have. 93,000 employees. That's 93,000 jobs. So your point about having an advocacy mechanism in the public sector is important because you would provide that type of data. 93,000 jobs are depending on these 560 whatever diverse companies doing services for just Johnson Controls. The other thing, how do you get this type of information? The councils, NMSDC, WeBank, they have to push the idea of surveillance systems. You cannot run a program managing 560 plus diverse companies on a spreadsheet. And I didn't mention that there are another 1,100 in the queue with 2,500 buyers all over the country, and that's not counting the ones not sitting in the United States. You cannot do it without surveillance systems where you can pick up this data and have an intelligent conversation with your management and the public sector. The other thing, cascading the requirements to other corporations. In our world, we call this second tier, okay? Yeah, you could give them a percentage, but you could say, no, I want a solution from you. I want a solution from you, Mr. Prime, that involves minority and women-owned companies. 88 of JCI's primes rose to the occasion. When I looked at their numbers, they only spent $111 million. That's not much compared to our $1.8 billion. But they managed 963 minority and women-owned companies with all the jobs that bring to the table. So my point is, when you deal with excludables, you pull on that thread, there's a lot to it. You need to have surveillance systems. You need to promote, as organizations, integrity around what the numbers are, taking out this idea of, or killing this idea of excluding things to make the percentage look better. Don't even deal with percentages. Deal with dollars and projects and what are they.
Reggie, let me push back on you on one thing, because do you or do others that you know use, the number I like is a POP number, percentage of possibilities. If I could have used MBEs for everything on this project, right. Forget the dollars, right? What was and did I use 100% available MBEs on this project? Right. Did I use 50%, 10%? The dollars on on $1 billion project, your POP number, it might only be 12% of MBEs, right? And so, the number books available on Amazon, you want to get my book about POP. But anyway, because that really tells me something about your effort. If there's an opportunity and you could have used MBEs on all 100% of that, if your number is 100 on that project, it tells me a lot about what's going on there. Do you any of your kind of $1 billion roundtable folks use POP numbers?
Okay, so my body language is suggesting I'm struggling with the pop number idea,
right.
And I want to tell you why. Only because it's an end of the game metric. I'm more concerned about the process that leads to the pop number. So, for example, at Johnson Controls, we have a project pipeline, and we have a top projects list. So if you notice, the impact is on the process. How many projects are on the top project list? What are the ratings on those projects? Which ones are going to convert? Which ones are going to be MBE? Which ones are going to be WBE? What's the probability that they will pop before the end of the year? How much is the pop value? So you see what I'm saying? So it's not the pop number at the end. It's this process of tracking the projects, filling out what the project pipeline is, where you can articulate what are the requirements, where are they, how much are they, when will they happen, who are the diverse suppliers. That's what I want the conversation to be about.
I understand the conversation, but the metric at the end of it, if you could have said, you know what, this was a $10 million project using every MBE possible. We used every MBE possible on this project. That might have only been 2% of that project, or it could have been 82% of that project. Yep. But if the MBEs who were in that pipeline were competitive and won that business, and that tells you where you need to get more MBEs in a particular pipeline or along a project, because you know, basic means the pop number basis, did you do your very best
so
on that project?
Let me tell you how we would interpret the pop number, right? The pop number is, did we get all the projects that are available for anybody to do? How many MBEs worked on those projects, period? Mm-hmm. And if they take the whole project, good. If they have part of the project, good. If they bring us an innovation where we add to the project pipeline, good. So it's not how many projects were totally saturated with the MBE doing all the work, is how much participation did we have on all the projects that we have available for anybody to do. So it's a different way.
So, and I know the conversation's getting good when people start using those imaginary quotes, because I saw you do that with the pop. Okay. So
it's not imaginary.
The $1 billion outtake when you need to fund.
But one of the other things, and I this is a time when I wish I would have paid more attention in like second and third grade doing math, because I was at the 1.8 billion trying to divide it by 565 suppliers and figure out about how much that is per supplier, but I couldn't. Right. So what I hear though is I had like a $2 billion supplier out of a $1.8 billion spend. I don't know what happened. So anyway, coming back full circle with the government and with corporations, the thing I'm hearing about is capacity. They got to have capacity. Government, MBDA, and I apologize for not knowing these statistics offhand, but either they want to deal with $500,000 businesses or $1 million businesses. And within the corporations, the supply chains have gotten so global, so they need businesses that have capacity and have capacity. And I look at my database of over 800 suppliers, and 37% of them are $1 million or less in revenue. So I'm going to leave the majority of my suppliers, and that average revenue of that 37% is $238,000. So mine cannot play according to the rules by MBDA and corporations if we're saying they have to be certain capacity sizes.
That's a myth. I have to say it. It's a myth that all diverse suppliers have to be large. Okay, that is not how it's done. The requirements of a project are based on what's needed. Some projects you need a global supplier with large capital and big employee bases. Other projects you don't. I'm going to give you an example. If you're building a car, you need to have a supplier of some capacity. If you're wiring a building, electrical contractor, they don't need to be 1,000 employees, okay? Videographers, they can be sole proprietors. Advertising firms, okay? So the myth is an easy answer, they all need to have capacity. The reality is the capacity that's needed is based on what needs to be done. If it's a big thing that needs to be done, you need big capacity. If it's a whole bunch of little things that need to be done, little is fine. We would not hire, Steven Spielberg to videotape a corporate meeting. I mean, come on. So the reality is the requirements match the needs, okay? We don't have electrical contractors from China wiring buildings in the United States. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So you see what I'm saying? So it's not a pat answer of we need big. It depends on what the project requirements are. And we match the supplier capabilities based on those project requirements. That's the reality.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Dick.
I think it's a function of role and value, and really. So let's talk about role. You know, the major process has been in the past: large corporation does business with large prime supplier who is asked to use minority businesses, or the subcontracting role in construction, which generally hasn't allowed the minority firm to really grow to a significant capacity. But today what we're seeing is minority firms bringing new solutions to the table that entitle them, because of their direct relationship and knowledge and insight of the corporate needs, they're now able to bring in the bigger partners. And it's not a front operation. It's that, okay, wait, the minority firm has done the work, it's developed the relationship, it understands the scope of the project better than the larger prime that they bring in to handle the capacity needs. So strategic teaming, I think, is really important. I think also value. We have a corporation present today that made a presentation to our Chief Procurement Officer Summit. And the gist of of their presentation was, you know, the real opportunity for minority business is to help that corporation bring them new business. Right. Okay, and so here's a corporation that has very strong ties throughout Houston, all very well politically connected, but now is looking into growing into another area of the country where they don't have those political ties, nor do they have the capability to do what they need to do or want to do there. Right. They do the bankroll, and so they can bankroll the project, but they need some people on the ground that have the technical expertise to get it done and the political connections to get them awarded the opportunity to do that. And so where did they turn? They turned to minority businesses. And those minority businesses in that particular part of the country were able to open up a whole scope of new business for this corporation. And so the idea of, and the point was made at the Chief Procurement Officer Summit, that the idea of just replacing one supplier with another supplier just isn't going to get us anywhere, okay? They've already been through that. They've already eliminated, they've become married to a lot of the suppliers that they have. We're going to have to look for role and value.
You talked about the Minority Business Development Agency creating a program for small businesses, minority small businesses with capacity. And I've talked to Director Hinton about this at length, and I think he's got it right. His opinion and President Obama's opinion is the Small Business Administration has programs designed for small businesses, micro businesses. That's when we talk about the 8A program. It is for socially disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged small businesses. When that small businessman or woman builds capacity, they're kicked out of the program because it's an economic development program. What Director Hinton is thinking is there's got to be a continuum for the next level, African-American owned small business. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And that goes back to our original point. Maybe we need to look at programs that take small business from the beginning, and as they want to grow, rather than kicking them out and saying, all right, you're good, fall off that cliff, you're not going to get any more government contracts, you should have capacity by now, create other programs. One thing that my boss has wanted to do, and I'd love some advocacy from some of you if you think that that's something we should do. In America, we define small business as 500 or less, and then you're other than small, right? We have no mid-tier businesses in America. And so what happens to a lot of minority businesses is as they grow and build capacity through some of these great programs for the small businesses of America, they fall off the cliff, or they intentionally stay small so they don't get pushed off the cliff, which doesn't create jobs in the African-American community. What if we created a mid-tier size business, people who graduate from the small business program, and for those businesses, we created some preference programs for them. If you mentor a small business, you mentor a socially disadvantaged business, we're going to give you a couple extra points so you can now compete. You're still competing against the Boeings and the Lockheeds right now. We want to change that. We want to give you some level playing field with some of the big companies. I would love to see the creation of that program in America, where we would look at businesses as small, medium, and large. I'd need your help to do that. I'd need your help to do that if you agree with that. If you don't, tell me you don't, and we won't do it. But I think that's where Director Hinton was going with the MBDA, was we've got programs for really small businesses. Let's try to do something for the next level African-American-owned small business, because they need some help too.
Okay. So I've learned a couple very valuable things up here this evening, or this morning. One is that when you're going to be on YouTube on stage, you really need to wear socks that have more elastic, because mine keep falling down around my ankles, and that could be very embarrassing on YouTube. The second is that when we decided to open it up to Twitter and some other things, people actually care. And so you've seen me checking the phone, and the questions are getting a little bit overwhelming for our Twitter group to keep forwarding to me. So